First, we're going to start with our grower panel. And on our panel this evening, we have Ron Toonders, who is a dairy producer who's currently growing and using switchgrass in Eastern Ontario. We have Scott Singer, who is from Nye, Ohio, who is a switchgrass grower from there, and Don Knott, who is a longtime switchgrass grower located here in Southern Ontario. So how the panel is going to go is that we're going to first have each one of the panelists tell us a little bit about their farm and a little bit about their switchgrass production. We're then going to follow that by questions that have been prepared and also questions from the floor. So please feel free to type questions as we go along, and we'll be sure to ask those in the question and answer period. So I'm going to invite Ron to turn on his camera and unmute his microphone while I share the screen here.
Is that okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine. Just give me one moment here. There we go. So we should all be able to see the screen of your farm.
Okay. I'm good to go?
Yep.
Okay. As Marlene said, I'm Ron Toonders. I farm Yolanda Farms with my wife and my son, Thomas. We live about 40 minutes south of Ottawa. On a dairy farm, we're milking about 120 cows. I have 1,100 acres, 700 owned and 400 rented. We grow about 400 acres of both corn and beans, and then 125 acres of alfalfa, and there's 50 acres of grassland that's not tiled, that's also rented. So we only grow grass on there. And then I have 50 acres of switchgrass planted so far, and planted another 50 acres for this year. Next slide, Marlene. Yeah. We first started growing switchgrass back in 2006. It was only 13 acres of untiled ground. It was really wet, had bedrock pretty close to the surface, and I figured there was no good for anything else, so we planted switchgrass on it. It was actually the worst field that I had to deal with, and there was quite a bit of biomass talk at the time. Theoretically for pellet stoves or lots of other things actually for biomass. And I figured there was a potential market that was opening up, and if we could supply a little bit of product for any testing that was being done, I was open for that. But I also knew at the time that I could always use it for the dairy cows, and we had bedding packs and required it in the stalls. So on top of having wheat, we always had that extra buffer of switchgrass. The first variety we grew was Cave-in Rock. It took about 3 years to get a decent stand at the time, and it was pretty tough. We had to be really patient with it. For the next 7 years, we were able, after it kind of got established, we were able to get 2 to 3 tons of straw every year. Then one year we had a really bad fusarium in our wheat, and there was too much fusarium to even use the straw in the ration. So we switched to the switchgrass and realized that it was pretty good. The dry cow ration really went well, and because of the low potassium. So we ended up using the wheat straw for bedding and the switchgrass in the rations for the next bunch of years. Anyway, the inputs for the switchgrass were really minimal, 40, 50 pounds in every year. We always cut it in the fall and usually on frost because it was the field was so wet. So it was usually November, early December, and hopefully before we had any snow. We always spring baled it, big square bales, and we waited until the field could hold a big square baler. And so sometimes it was even early June before we got in there. We had the field for 10 years, and the landlord decided he wanted to tile the field for, well, I think he wanted to get a little bit more rent out of me, but he also wanted the switchgrass out. He didn't like it for whatever reason. I never understood. But So I had no switchgrass at all for 3 years. And I wound up missing having a guaranteed supply of good straw. It was just always there. Lots of years we had, either too wet or straw got rained on and wound up being dusty, and we were always checking for fusarium levels in it. And then at the same time, commodity prices were pretty good, so we were kind of reluctant to plant switchgrass because of the establishment time. So I kind of wasn't paying attention to switchgrass for a while, and but then all of a sudden we were starting to get a lot of wildlife damage. We lived close to the swamp. We have a lot of deer that were just annihilating our beans and corn. So I got thinking more about switchgrass, and I found out that there's a bunch of guys doing a lot of work on it still, and really improving the varieties. So in 2019, I seeded 14 acres of a variety called Chippewa right up alongside probably a 2,000 acre swamp, and another 4 acres of a variety called Big Rock. Next slide. I planted the switchgrass in the picture on the left in a field of corn stalks. I did one pass with a turbo till and then planted it. Roger was terrified because he didn't think I was going to get very good seed to soil contact. So he begged me to roll it a couple of times, and I did, and we got really good success. It came up really nice. The other field on the right, that was just in bean straw. We did it with a 13-foot Great Plains drill, and it was planted on June 9th, so it was pretty late. We sprayed it. It was burned down first on both fields with Roundup, and we sprayed Pursuit on it pre-emerge, and we had good weed control. We combined the 14 acres. Next slide. We combined the 14 acres the first year. This is just a field of that year. Next. We combined it, but it didn't really reach maturity. We had a late start and a relatively early frost, and we got some seed, but it didn't really pan out at all to be viable. Anyway, we wound up cutting that field shortly after. And then I left it for the winter and baled it in the spring and got about a ton to the acre of straw from the first year. And so this spring, next slide, this spring, well, this is the bales we harvested, and this is my TMR. We just unrolled the bales that we had and put it in the TMR just to see how much, well, to weigh them, and also to figure out how we were going to handle them. We started just by grinding them in the TMR. Next. So that's a self-propelled TMR. I just put it in, let it grind for 15 or 20 minutes, and it wasn't fine enough for the dairy ration, but it was pretty good for the stalls. Next. In 2020, we used our John Deere seed drill with an air cart. We had much more accurate planting with this machine than the Great Plains. We had trouble getting accurate, the right amount of seed on the field accurately, but this one was really good. We could decide exactly how much we wanted, and it put it there. And again, this field has moisture issues. On the right hand side, it's only about a foot above the bottom of the ditch. We always struggled with the water sitting in there. If we had a wet summer, the water would pond right in front of the tractor and to the right. So anyway, I took 20 acres off of this. Is a 60 acre field. I took 20 acres off of one end and planted Big Rock in here. It turned out to be pretty weedy this year, but we had a really dry summer, and I think that the spray didn't work as well as it has in the past. Anyway, this fall, next slide, Marlene. Oh, one more. This is a guy in Osgood on the left. He planted his first year switchgrass, and the one on the right is my switchgrass from last year. And behind it in the lighter color, that's the 2020 seeding. Next. The stick measures the orange is at 5 feet and 6 feet, and the field on the right is me. I'm 6'2", and the other guy is slightly shorter than I am. So that's just an indication of how tall this. These are both second year crop. Next. So we combined the 2019 seedings on October 9th, and then cut all of the switchgrass on November 6th. That's my old 6620. It's a combine from the early 80s, I think. It did a pretty good job combining. We also managed to bale everything this fall. Next. Well, that's another picture of me swathing. So you can see there's a fair bit of tramping because I have a 13-foot head on that combine, and we cut it afterwards. So now next picture. You can see there's a fair bit of stubble left in the field. We didn't exactly disbine it the same direction as we combined it, which is something that I'll work on. But this 10-acre field, we got 95 bales off of it this fall. They're about 350 to 375 kilo bales. I figured that it was about just shy of 3 tons to the acre, and that's after driving through the whole thing with the combine. The other field that was seeded this year was pretty weedy, and we cut it all, and then we chopped the weedy stuff and use it for bedding, and we saved the clean straw for in the ration. We mixed the weedy stuff with bean straw. We baled a bunch of bean straw because it was such a nice fall to do that too. So we had a combination of the two, and we're using that in the stalls now. Yeah, for about a month and a half, we've been using that. We use about 150 to 200 kilograms a day for livestock bedding, and about 200 kilograms in the ration for between the cows, dry cows, and we put some in the heifer ration as well. I think for 120 cow dairy, I think we can get away with 50 acres of switchgrass to do all of my farm. I intend to grow more because I'd like to see other farmers try some of this, and I'd like to be able to sell into the straw market. So that's kind of what I've got. A couple more pictures there, and it's just me loading up the bales. Go ahead. Oh yes, these are the 12. There's 12 bales left from my spring baling, and I'd never tried this before. Just leaving them outside. They've been sitting outside here on this cement pad since last, I'm going to say June, and just to see how badly they deteriorate. I'm told that they'll stand it, and I wanted to prove it. Next slide. I see no degradation at all, except for the very bottom. There's about 1.5 inch layer where the moisture touches it. Other than that, every once in a while I'll grab a bale and I'll use it, and there's just nothing wrong with it at all. It's shedding water very well. So I think I'm going to keep doing that, storing outside, so I have more room in sheds for other things. This is the inside of our barn. It was just bedded a couple of days ago, and the bedding seems to hang in there longer than wheat straw does. Wheat straw, we have to bed at least every 2 weeks. We just put a pile in the center, and with the switchgrass, it seems to be closer to 3 weeks. So if we can go a little longer, then we need less volume. So I think that's kind of it, Marlene.
Great, thank you, Ron. I'm going to ask Scott now to put on his video and turn on his microphone to tell us a bit about his farm.
Hi, hope you can hear me all right.
Can hear you fine.
You can advance to the first slide there, Marlene. Thank you. So yeah, thanks for having me and let me share a little bit about myself and Singer Farms. I graduated from the Ohio State University School of Natural Resources with a degree in natural resource management, wildlife management specialty. So after that, I spent 12 years in Northeast Pennsylvania, working for the United States Department of Agriculture and Natural Resource Conservation Service as a wildlife biologist, assisting landowners establish and manage several thousand acres when it was all said and done of native grasses for conservation cover, dual purpose conservation cover, soil and water, wildlife. And later, towards the end of that stint with the USDA, working with landowners, sort of actively engaged with sort of driving some local markets development, and establishing the grasslands in Northeast PA for, you know, both dual conservation and production purposes, trying to move it onto the farms with the thought process of making $1 at it as a production crop. So I got really excited about that. And, we had some local projects going where we had some uses in local school district, et cetera, using as combustion fuel. We worked on projects with densification, kind of just sort of easing into that whole thing. And some of those fields, I think, that originally were established in that time are still in production. So I'm happy to hear that. Some of the folks hopefully joined us tonight for some of this. In 2012, we packed our bags, headed back to Northwest Ohio to keep the family farm going as my mother and father crept closer to the age of retirement and the farm was getting physically challenging to manage. So Singer Farms now is my mother, father, sister, my wife and I, kids. And, I like to think of that as a family farm right there, looking after about 500 acres of farmland in Defiance County in northwestern Ohio. We keep just enough of these critters around on the farm to keep us busy, keep us making a little bit of forage, making some hay, making sure we have something to do when we're not doing anything else. This year, they made it through the winter on native grass exclusively. We have a few acres, 3 acres of eastern gamma grass in production, make hay on that. We have big blue stem, 2 acres of big blue stem in production, and then I'm pick and choose from our switchgrass acres to make some hay on there occasionally. So this year they made it through the winter and even are now still munching on those bales from last year. Next slide. So our operation, modest operation in Northwest Ohio, we grow soybeans and rye, cereal rye as both our cover crop, which we use on as many acres as we can every year. I try to get to 100% every year, weather allows. As a cover crop is pretty reliable for us. And then we grow fields of cereal rye in rotation around the farm to keep a rotation with our soybean production, and then to sell rye seed locally. Some other farmers that use cereal rye as cover crops, they can buy their seed locally from us. So we've seen that as a pretty good opportunity to get into with our operation. We also manage so we're growing anywhere from 350 acres of soybeans a year. We have 100 acres or so of conservation cover, almost exclusively native grassland, scattered throughout the farm, filter strips, some grasslands, whole field grasslands. So we manage those accordingly. And then we have about 50 acres so far that brought into production of switchgrass as a standalone crop for straw, forage, and seed production in the future. So looking forward to some more acres coming into production this next year for seed production. And so we're pretty excited about that. So next slide. So just back up a little bit and show you where I'm at. If you're not familiar with Northwest Ohio, which I'm assuming for anybody that doesn't live here, you're not familiar with it. It is that green million-acre mud puddle directly southwest of, thank you, southwest of Lake Erie. And so we are literally in the middle of that, right along the Maumee River, farm right along the Maumee River. So give you a little idea of where we're at in Ohio there. Next slide. Most of the time, this is how we feel. It makes us laugh and makes us cry sometimes. But next slide. We are blessed with some pretty productive farmland. Most of Northwest Ohio, given the right conditions, can hold its own with the rest of the Midwest as far as productivity. We have plenty of rain, not a limiting factor. Our soils and our hydrology become our limiting factor, and I'll touch on those later on here. But here's a nice field of switchgrass that we have established, and in the foreground you can see we made a late forage harvest on that. Dry year, hay started to become short everywhere. You can see the writing on the wall. Have a nice field of grass like this will produce some really good forage in large quantities. Now, albeit not ideal or optimal harvest time, but I think the Longhorns will take that over snowballs in February any day of the week. So next slide. Our management has traditionally been with fire on a lot of our conservation grounds. So we have a lot of experience using fire as a management tool for our grasslands, and it can come in handy if you're able to do that to add that tool to your toolbox as an adapted tool to manage your grasslands. Next slide. You can see the fire boss here finishing the job, making sure every last little bit of grassland gets going there. Next slide. So yeah, we're bringing fields into production here. Our operation used to be a dairy farm, then to a beef farm, then primarily grain farm as I moved away. Most of the haying equipment had been moved off the farm. We do have a nice arrangement with our neighbors who have all the nice big baling equipment that can do the job for us. We do take the opportunity to use it occasionally. That's my dad once again in the tractor, spending some quality time in the field. In a second year early stand there, you can see the rows are still arranged, haven't blended together or anything. So real early stand there. So most of our harvesting is done custom. That presents a few challenges, but I'll say it works out real good because they're making money, we're making money, and kind of utilizing each other in a good synergy there. So we do like that. So next slide. Where we're at though, honestly, our challenges are real with our soil conditions. This is a seedling that in most of my experience, achieving just this limited growth, which only being 10, 12 inches tall in the first year, putting down some decent roots, is going to survive into the next year. This, however, I just saw a week ago, frost heaved out of the ground. It's a challenge. We have to work around it. You have to sort of assume a certain amount of that's going to happen with our field conditions, and in any given year you can just suffer from that. So something we work around, challenges that we try to address. Next slide. most of our fields historically, you know, when we think about what you expect to see after a seeding year, this is kind of where we're at, you know, with traditional methods and doing what you can do. This type of growth in the first year used to make me feel real good about second year potential for establishment. Even in our tough conditions, you know, we can achieve this for the most part. Now, looking forward, I really look forward to, you know, improvements where we see early establishment become less of an issue, and thicker, better stands early on, more productive out of the gate. That's just going to help everybody. And so I'm really looking forward to that as we move forward, and looking forward to being a part of that. And so next slide. Our farm, you know, specifically, we have covered what I would consider all of the year as far as management and harvest timeframes. We use it for a variety of our own purposes. We're baling straw primarily off of it for sale into the erosion sock control market. But we've had weather conditions where we've been forced to harvest early, harvest late. We have some very narrow windows in our ground. If you want to harvest in the fall, you're generally going to be looking at those exact same conditions that you'd love to be cutting soybeans, and those windows are short. Frozen ground in the winter offers our best opportunity. Then again, in the spring, frozen ground with no snow offers good opportunities. And we have covered all of those, including this, which shows a nice example here of our last harvest on this field, which was, if you can see down through the middle there, the combine track from the previous fall's seed harvest. We have the beginnings of new switchgrass coming through, just starting to go. That day we went in and baled, made a great product. Straw was great, dried just fine, had good conditions. So we were glad we waited till the ground was fit, and we're able to get in and get a good harvest off that. So next slide. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell. We're looking to expand here again and diversify a little bit of what we're doing. Anybody that spends any amount of time around me at all knows that I'm pretty bullish on switchgrass and native grass as a crop for us all to you know, stay economically sustainable on the farm, small farm like us. And then of course, in the back of my head, always stay environmentally sustainable as well. So thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions that anybody has.
Great, thank you so much, Scott. That was really interesting to hear about where you're at. So now I'm going to ask that Don turns on his video. I'm just going to get your presentation up and going here as well. Okay, so we should be able to see your screen there, and Don, take it away.
Very good. Good evening, everyone. I'm coming to you from the heart of Huron County, where I've been farming all my life. We've been basically a cash crop farm all my farming career. And I met Roger Sampson from Reap Canada in the fall of 2005. And Roger Sampson introduced me to switchgrass. We were at that time producing a pellet made from oat hulls and wheat shorts, which we fed the cattle. And we used that basically for feed for years. And Roger contacted me once, started to talk about biomass fuel. So long story short, we wound up planting 325 acres of switchgrass as an experiment in 2006. That experiment led me to a lot of years, a long time grower of switchgrass. We've been growing it ever since. We've been as high as 400 acres and we've been as low as 50. What you're looking at in this picture is our first major establishments of some of Roger's new varieties. And that's what I'm going to focus on here tonight, is the development of these new varieties over the years. The one I'm facing there is called Big Rock. That picture was taken, I believe, when it was in its third year. And the one behind me on the other side of that division is Tecumseh. These were developed from a 1.5 acre plot that we had the prior year. And these two plots were planted in 2016. Pay attention to the field on the right, the Tecumseh, because we're going to see it several times more in this slideshow. So Marlene, show the next slide. So here's the original Cave-in Rock, the one we planted 325 acres of. And you can see in the top picture, this was the typical type of establishment we got from direct seeding back in 2006. Lots of foxtail and very little visible switchgrass. We sowed, the field you see below is actually the Cave-in Rock in its third year from the field that we planted direct seed, which was 50 acres. And when we planted it the first year, I swore we'd never have switchgrass in that plot at all because all we could find was foxtail. But yet by May of the next year, we had a solid stand of switchgrass. Most of the other acres we planted in 2006, we used an oat cover crop. It worked fairly well, kept the crop clean, and did get, you know, a reasonable stand of switchgrass, probably in the neighborhood of a foot to 18 inches tall by fall. That's been the biggest problem with switchgrass production for just about anyone in the past, is the length of time it takes to get a crop up and going. And that was a negative for a lot of cash crop people in particular. I'm kind of a person who, I don't really want to think about marginal production here. I know that's what everybody likes to talk about, but I've always thought about switchgrass as a mainstream crop, something that I could use as a rotational crop to clean up my fields and get me back into good production for colored beans and the more valuable cash crops. So just show the next slide, Marlene. So here we are back to this field of Tecumseh. You can see on the right, on the very top corner there, you can see the division there. This is where we started harvesting the Tecumseh seed. We usually harvested it around first 2 weeks of October, just when the seed's dry, but the grass has still got some life in it. Next slide. So here's a picture of Big Rock. This was harvested from that first plot of seed that you saw me looking at there in the first slide. This is the stand when it's 4 years old. It was taken last summer, about late July. It was just starting to head out. It's right behind my house on my home farm, and it's just a beautiful stand of switchgrass. It's showing me now all of the development that Roger's put into these varieties over the years is really starting to show the benefits. This crop went on to be 7 to 7.5 feet tall by fall. Next slide. So here's the same field of Tecumseh. It's now 5 years old, and Roger has developed Tecumseh 2, which will replace this variety. So we decided to take this crop out last fall. So we cut it on September the 17th, I believe it was. We're trying to show here what you can do with switchgrass as a rotational crop. Also, as to be able to use these early varieties. Tecumseh is an early variety, and you can cut it, shows you can cut it in late September, bale it for feed, and not do harm to the crop. And I'll explain that in a minute. So, like I say, we cut this in September the 17th and baled it 4 days later. Show the next slide, Marlene. So here's the field cut and swash. You can see the big rock still standing over on the left-hand side. We had beautiful weather for about 4 days, so it laid for 4 days. We wound up baling it at 8% moisture. Next slide. So in order to bale it, this was cut with a 14-foot disc vine, as you saw in the picture there. They were fairly heavy swaths, so we did not double them up. We left them as single swaths. So we raked it in the morning, and we were able to bale it at 8% moisture in that afternoon. Next slide. So you can see by the proliferation of bales in this field that the yield was fairly significant. And in the end, it ran very close to 12,000 pounds of dry material, 8% moisture in the bale. That to me shows the improvements that Rogers made over the years. We're actually showing that we're getting a huge increase in yield. We normally got in the past in cave and rock, we would be in the 8,000 to 9,000 pound range. But this is the first of these new varieties that we've actually cut and taken out of production and done it in this manner, where we cut it in the fall and baled it in the fall. Normally, I've been a proponent of cutting it in the fall and letting it lay in the swath all winter and harvesting it in the springtime. But Roger and I have been talking about these new varieties, and we believe that the early varieties like Tecumseh fit very well into the dairy industry to produce dry cow feed, and possibly even be able to feed it to milk cows if you can harvest it in the fall in these types of conditions. Now, one thing I want to point out very much here is that I have seen fields of switchgrass where they were cut too early. Particularly this showed up at the Woodstock Farm Show, where we're managing the plots down there. And for demonstration purposes, they were cutting those plots every year, in early September when they were green. And after about 4 to 5 years, they completely killed out some of the lowland varieties and severely damaged the cave and rock variety that was planted there, which Roger's always told me, you can't cut it too often when it's green. If you do it year after year, you'll kill it. So this field here, what I want to point out is this field didn't grow back. We cut it on September the 17th. I expected that we would see some growth still in the fall before snow come. That didn't happen. We plowed this field in late October, and there was absolutely no regrowth. So what that's telling me is that we had reached the point of physiological maturity, that we would not be damaging this crop by cutting it at this stage. So that gives me a lot of faith going forward in telling dairy farmers that they could use these types of varieties to harvest them early and be able to feed it to the dry cows and possibly even use it in the milk cow rations. We have some farmers in the Clinton area that are experimenting with that type of idea. Next slide, please. So here's the proof of the pudding, I guess. like I say, when you saw that picture of us cutting the cave-in rock way back in 2007, 2008, here's the difference in establishment. What you're looking at here is the division line between the new Tecumseh 2 on the right and the new Big Rock 2 on the left. This was planted in the spring of last year around mid-May, and by the 1st of October was in the 5 to 6 foot range. This is phenomenal improvement that Roger has developed over these years and bred into these plants, selected these plants for better emergence, faster growth. To me, it's just been a phenomenal change in all the years we've been doing this. And it gives me great faith in planting. And it's actually changed my way of thinking of planting switchgrass. We have traditionally been a conventional cover crop type of planting. I've come 180 degrees on that one. I now will do no-till and use these varieties direct seeded, because you can see what happens when you can plant early in mid-May or late May and get this type of growth in the first year. This is phenomenal, because it changes the whole economic picture for a cash cropper in particular to grow this type of crop. And if you can get yields in that 12,000 pound range, the economics start to look pretty good. And I'm a strong believer that we can use this type of crop for rotational purposes to clean up the fields, because after we plowed the 325 acres up in 2016, I believe it was, they've been down 10 years. And the benefits we saw in the following years growing white beans and soybeans and corn have been phenomenal. The improvement in soil tilth and moisture holding capability has just been phenomenal. So that's it for me, Marlene.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Don. That's I definitely remember when we toured through your different fields there a couple of years ago when we had our field day out at your place in, I think it was August. So I'm going to invite Scott and Ron to also turn on their cameras, and we're going to start with some of the questions. Okay, so I'm gonna make this look hopefully pretty good here. We're all on one page. So just bear with me for a moment. I've lost Ron. There we go. There's Ron. It's amazing how you can lose somebody in virtual space. There we go. So now we can have a nice conversation. So I'm going to start with the question here. So what would you say are best management practices that help you make a reliable harvest of a quality product of switchgrass? And any of you, please feel free to answer.
Well,
I just I knew
Go
that was
first,
going to happen.
Don.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll just
You
hop
go ahead.
in right quick. I think one thing that we need to think about as a management practice or as a mindset growing this as a crop is thinking long term, right? So making sure we make that adjustment in the production standpoint from in our management decisions. So for instance, stand health and rotation of harvest times, right? So as was alluded to in one of the presentations before, right? So long-term stand sustainability, making sure repetitive harvests don't fall over the same time frames, et cetera. Those things just bear in mind for the long term. And I think that'll help us as a best management practice maintain our low inputs, not having to add additional inputs to compensate for that harvest regime that we might be implementing. So that's an important thing. And then another thing I think of as a best management practice for us that's very important is clean equipment. And a lot of times we kind of lose track of that, bouncing from field to field, doing things with us, having custom harvesters come in. It's worth it for me to spend a little bit of time ahead of that with the air hose, blowing equipment off, making sure that my fields don't develop a problem like a cool season grass creeping in just because we didn't pay attention to having the equipment clean before we went into the field. So little thing like that really helps and tries for me to make sure I'm not running into problems in the long term in a crop that I expect to be out there for years because I wasn't paying attention to the details, just pulling in and out of the field or something simple like that. So again, it comes back to just thinking long term, managing the crop as something you have to think out in year periods, multiple years ahead. So just thought I'd add that.
Yeah, and Don, you had something to say there as well.
Well, I'd like to concentrate mainly on the marketing side of best management practices here. In order to sell a product, you have to produce a good product. And this is one of the things that we've ran into over the years. And it's kind of like my theory of, being on good cash crop land where it's well drained, good soil, highly productive soil, versus somebody's planting on marginal soil. The problem with planting on marginal soil, it's okay if you're going to burn the material, or if you've got maybe selling it to strawberry mulch or something like that. But if you're going to feed it to dairy cows, that's a whole different story. You need to be able to produce a good quality product. And if you're going to either cut it in the fall and bale it, or cut it in the fall and bale it in the spring, you need to be able to get into the field. And if you've got marginal soil that's wet and not well drained, you can't get big equipment in there. You're in the wrong seasons for that. So that's why I stress so much that switchgrass is a viable crop for a cash cropper, and you can plant it on good land and get good yields and make it work economically. And when you can produce a bale of straw that's clean and dry and looks very much like wheat straw, and have very minimal molds or things like that, because that's what happens to the farmers that have to wait too long into, say, June to harvest their material. It gets too many rains, it gets too much Alton air building up on the plants, and this causes a dusty product that dairy farmers don't want. So I can appreciate that, and from a management standpoint, that's one of the things I feel is very important.
Yeah, and Ron, is there anything you'd like to add about best management practices?
As far as getting going on a seed or a field establishment, I've just the field has to start clean. You can't go into a weedy field or a field that you've had issues with other weeds. You've got to start clean. So a Roundup burn down right at the beginning is I think it's really important. We use our worst land mainly because we can't grow anything else on it, but it's not that bad that we don't get on it normally at a decent time. And I'm in a neighborhood where I'm already kind of the weird guy growing a weird crop, and there's a whole bunch of really aggressive cash croppers around here who think I'm nuts because I'm growing switchgrass, and I'm not sure I could face them growing it on my good land. So I'm taking the fields that are that they know I'm not doing a good job growing corn or soybeans on already. So anyway, that's in my defense. That's why I'm using my poorest land. So yeah.
Yeah.
If I could bounce in and just add something to that, to Ron's statement, it was right on with the weed control early. And I would encourage folks to look at that as a very important aspect of success down the road, is having that long-term vision, even in the past, knowing what was in your field 5 years ago that could creep up and give you problems. So understanding that crop history will help you have a better quality product in the end, because it's going to be quicker established and better established than give you a better product. So that early on scouting ahead of the game, way before the drill, you got to know and anticipate what weeds you're going to deal with. And that's a big advantage in trying to move forward. Thank you for bringing that up. It was in my notes, Ron, and I forgot to say it.
Yeah, and and maybe just to pop to something that Don had said as well too, in terms of dustiness of switchgrass, that's and use on dairies, like that's something that I've been hearing from people in the past. So I think it's really about trying to make sure that you have an appropriate product for the end use. So if it's going into dairy cattle feed, dairy farmers are really looking for that high quality feed to be fed to their cows, which is what we heard in our first webinar from Dr. Gail Carpenter. So the next question here is, what specific challenges do you see in spring and fall harvesting? So maybe we can start with, let's just start with the spring harvest, and we'll start with Scott because you're right above me on my screen.
So, you know, as I thought about this spring fall harvest, and as it evolved in real time for me, really with our ground conditions being our limiting factor, right? Proper ground conditions are our limiting factor. So spring and fall really for us present the same challenges. So it's not so much difference between those two. So I don't draw a lot of distinctions. We're looking for the same window of opportunity to find, to get in our fields without doing damage. And so really it boils down to, are you looking the dry ground versus the frozen ground? Dry ground having these really narrow windows. We can get them if we're lucky, and then you take advantage of those, and you have to be ready to do that. So, you know, the challenge is being ready, making sure you're paying attention. You have your target date, and you can act slightly ahead or slightly behind that, because it's important to be able to act promptly when your field conditions are right in our situation, or you might be shut out. And if we get a half inch of rain at any given time during the poor drying conditions, it can close us out of the fields for you know, 5 days to a week. It doesn't take a lot to stack those up, and pretty soon you're 3 weeks behind where you should be trying to do anything in the field. So again, just making sure that you sort of have that target and then can act properly accordingly in those short windows is big. Frozen ground presents the same sort of challenges, except you have your windows a little broader. Depending on where you at, your time in snow free becomes, you know, the question of when do you have frozen ground without snow on the ground, or without snow in the forecast in a reasonable time that you're going to do your harvest. Advantages, you know, that works to our advantages. Basically, we're cut, bale in a day. So, you know, that works to our advantage where we're quick in and out of the field on acreage. So the challenges, again, really revolve around, for us, is that proper field conditions and that timing of harvest. And so I guess we're fortunate in that those are our limiting factors, but it's just something we deal with.
Yeah.
I agree with Scott that the timing is everything in the fall, and if the field is too wet, you can't get on it. I'm not afraid to leave it till the spring. But on the other hand, finding out that round bales can last out in the weather for a long time, even baled a little bit damp, makes me braver to try and bale a tougher bale and leave it sit outside. I've had a fire in a shed from spontaneous combustion in hay before, and I don't ever want to go through that again. But if I would bale it and leave it outside now if it was a little bit damp. We have tile drain ground, and we do get windows that are a half inch of rain would only set us back a half a day or 3/4 of a day usually if the sun comes out. It takes quite a bit more rain to stop us. So I think I'm braver to do fall stuff now. Then the product, the straw is definitely not as dusty in the spring.
And Don, what would you add to this?
Well, everybody has their different set of criteria and problems, I guess. I live next Lake Huron, so I don't have a situation where I got frozen ground and dry straw. I got snow on the ground all the time. So, you know, it's all about your environment. And like I say, we have well-drained land where we're on. And, you know, I talk to Roger about this quite often, this business of harvesting fall or spring, which is better. And I always felt that spring was better because that's what I had to do. Because if I cut it in late October, which when my longer later day varieties were ready to cut, I usually cut around Halloween, and then I'm handcuffed. I pretty well have to leave it to spring. Then I can't get dry conditions in November to do that because I get cloud off the lake and drizzle, and it just never works out. But these new varieties like Tecumseh and Tecumseh 2 are so much earlier that he's kind of opened my eyes to the idea of cutting them after they've reached physiological maturity and be able to bale them in the fall for the dairy industry, which prefers that type of cutting to prevent that mold. So I like that idea. And even if you've got a field maybe that's a little bit marginal, with those early varieties, you have a chance that you might be able to get in there in dry conditions in the fall. You know, September would not be that bad most years for a field that's maybe not perfectly drained. The beauty of switchgrass, or of no matter what variety or what maturity you're growing, is that it's almost bulletproof. If I cut switchgrass in September and it starts raining really bad after that, and I can't get back there to bale it, okay, I'm going to get it in the springtime, and I'm not going to lose that crop. That's the biggest advantage I see with this crop. It's virtually indestructible, and that's a big advantage if you're growing it for a cash crop, because nobody likes to lose a crop.
Yeah, that's good advice there in terms of even to like really knowing your area in terms of like precipitation and your field conditions, your soil conditions, and that, because that's going to make a big difference in terms of what is possible. So Gail, are there any questions in the chat?
No, nothing's popped up, Marlene. I haven't seen any hands up. I have been watching, so if you guys have any questions you want to pass on to the committee or the panel, please feel to drop them. We're going to have a couple more questions, I think, from Marlene, but if you have questions in the meantime, feel free to hop in.
Yeah. Sorry, we have a bit of background noise, so I'm just going to, oh, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, so we'll carry on. So the next two questions are a little bit more about processing and chopping. So on processing and chopping, what is the desired length that you're looking for switchgrass, and what's the best method for chopping that? So this would be for use if you're looking at it for use in the dairy industry.
We get a custom guy in to do our chopping for us, and in the past they were usually using a 2 and a 2.5 inch screen. And the last time he showed up with a 1.5 and a 2, and I really like the product that's coming out. There's just less long escape chunks in there, and the butter fat didn't change. The only difference we noticed was dry cows weren't sorting at all anymore. I can't say not at all, but very little. And the cows didn't sort it either. So I really like the finer chop. I was a little bit afraid the butter fat may suffer a little bit, but it stayed exactly where it was before with the longer chop. So that's been our experience.
Yeah.
So we don't have a lot of need to reduce for forage from a ration standpoint, but we did find that, especially in our eastern gamma grass, sure would translate right along with the switchgrass in our summer harvest for forage, trying to make that nice quality forage. The chopper on the baler did a great job of sizing it to make it real palatable and still held together nice in bales. So it was a question we had going in, how the bale is going to perform, chopper is going to work with this material. Just the standard chopper on the bale ahead of it was great to size that to a nice forage.
And Don, anything to add?
Yeah, we work with the local dairy farmers here and have for quite a few years now. We've done quite a number of different things, everything from having knives in the baler that chop at 6 to 10 inches long, which is mainly they use that in their pack barns. They're happy with that length. If they're going to feed it to their dry cows, they want it much shorter. We used those pre-choppers on the baler one year, made a really nice product, about 1.5 to maybe 3 inches long in length. That worked well for some of the chicken farmers. I got one chicken farmer in particular who's been using that product. The dairy farmers, after using it for a while, said, well, no, I'd like to have it a little finer. It would really be better if we just put it through the TMR and get it down in that 1 to 1.5 inch range. So most of them have reverted back now, and even the chicken farmer, we stopped producing that type of material and just bale it with the 6 to 10 inch long type bales. And they put it through the TMR mixers or TMR, not TMRs, tub grinders, and grind it to whatever level they want, be it for chickens or for dry cows, or in one case, they grind it through a 1/4 inch screen and produce that really fine product that they use on the rubber mats in the free stalls. You just put a dusting of that over the rubber mats. It's very absorbent, and it prevents the cows from damaging the hock while they're trying to get up off those rubber mats. So we've tried a lot of different things over the years. We used to make pellets too, of course, and we've ground it through hammer mills, and we've ground it through tub grinders. It's always costly to grind it, particularly for the making pellets. It's has to be ground fairly fine, and that's always was a cost, and that kind of shot down the idea of making pellets for fuel because it was too expensive to grind and pelletize. But in general, right now, most of my stuff goes to dairy farms, either for bedding or for feed.
Yeah, so it looks like we have a raised hand. So I'll ask Lynn to unmute herself and ask a question.
Yeah, hi. I want to say hi to Scott. I haven't seen him for a while. He's the reason why I have these habit. And next time you get back to Columbia County, let me up, bud. So my question is mostly about, I have wet ground as well. And not this past year, but 2 years before that were pretty wet summers. And I lost most of my switchgrass in there, but the reed canary kind of loved it and took over, you know. What is the best variety of switchgrass, do you think, for wet ground that's going to get 5-6 feet tall?
Well, Lynn, I'll jump in, I guess, and say hi to begin with. Nice hearing from you again. But, you know, there's no magic bullet when it comes to that. Switchgrass is widely adapted. I think these new varieties are going to give us a leg up when we look at challenging conditions. And therein lies a challenging condition. If I hear correctly that you said reed canary grass, there isn't, I don't think, any more challenging of a condition than fighting that grass, specifically trying to get established. So quick establishing is going to be your key. And those varieties that, like all of us looking forward to coming down the pike here, where we're looking for that early window, is going to work to the advantage. The other guys might have a favorite that they would pick out, but I don't quite yet.
I mean, I had it and lost it, you know. I had it pretty well established and lost it through those wet summers. So it kind of died after it was established. So I used Shawnee. Are you familiar with Shawnee at all?
I don't have a lot of experience in pure stands with that. I do know, though, that when you're talking about having it already somewhat established and losing out the competition battle to something like reed canary grass, you can generally turn that back around. If you haven't lost it completely and it's just suppressed, those plants still exist just in a suppressed state, you can generally turn that back around with some management thrown at it. I'd encourage you to look at that first before a reseeding, but the other guys might have a favorite to go into those tough conditions in that wet soil.
So hit it with Roundup in the spring when it first greens up?
You're going to have those little windows of opportunity with a broad spectrum herbicide like Roundup. Reed canary grass being a little challenging because of its overlap more so in the growing season than, let's say, your cool season grasses that you can catch in a active growing state while your switchgrass is still dormant to use a broad spectrum herbicide like that. But it may be that you have to look to something again in that small window there where you can be sure that you can use that a dormant application and clean it up that way. Otherwise, I would look to the fall when possibly you could get another dormant time or a mechanical advantage with the switchgrass being dormant and the reed canary grass being in a growth stage where you can spray it. So sometimes that comes after a mowing or in a harvest time frame where we remove the vegetation, we reinvigorate some of the plants out there that get sunlight now that they weren't receiving. They get a little growth spurt in the fall, and of course then in the fall in perennials using a systemic like broad spectrum like glyphosate will then translocate to roots and do a good job for cleaning those fields up. But you really got to be Johnny on the spot with management there with using those to make sure your windows are going to work for you.
Yeah. Is there anything that either Don or Ron want to add in there?
Start clean. That's the big, for us, you just have to have those grasses out. So I think if you could plant beans, Roundup Ready beans in front and get a couple of sprays in there on the beans, and then next spring still do another burn down, I think that you can get ahead of the reed canary. But
it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Definitely sounds like it. I think there's another question that's in the chat here, and I see Gail has popped up. So
yeah, we have a question here from Daniel. Is there any experience with interseeding with low growing legumes such as white clover to stifle weeds on the establishment year, yet not compete with the establishment of the switchgrass? This could be helpful for organic establishment and could allow for fall grazing post-harvest if the switch is baled in the fall. Also, being able to include a legume that does not impact the switch harvest could cut down on nitrogen fertilizer costs. So do we have any experience or comments on that?
I will just start out by saying that one of my most concerning plants when I look at the history of a field and times where we were looking at, establishing grasses in crop fields, if there was clover history in that field, you can be very certain that there will be clover creeping back into your planting in 5 years or some time frame. And clover, unfortunately, as much as there can be a benefit, like was mentioned there, can present significant competition early on in establishment. So I worry a lot. And when I see a little clover, you can assure yourself that in a couple of years, you're going to have a lot. So I really like that notion of having that interaction between the legumes. I like to think about native legumes, especially, and the potential for doing that. We have to be cautious with those in the establishment year because, as all of us have painfully learned, any competition is bad competition in the establishment year. So you have to be super careful with things that can take advantage of growing conditions that you're providing out there such that they don't run you over in the long run. Clover, in my experience, being one of those. So I throw caution to that, but I really like the idea of that. We just haven't found a lot of good companion crops for early establishment. It's best just to have sort of blank slate out there.
yeah. Either Don or Ron?
Yeah, Marlene, I don't know if this would work or not. I have no experience with this type of a problem, but we have had experience with trying to clean up a field that maybe got twitch grass, quack grass, invading in the field and starting to develop in patches. Where we went in early May, just as the switchgrass was just starting to show a 1/4 inch shoot out of the ground, and applied a liter of Roundup. And that cleans up everything. It gets rid of the dandelions and whatever Roundup will kill at that stage. Whether that would take out this clover they're talking about, I am not sure. I am not an expert on that. But that's been my experience in the past at cleaning up a field. It's very cheap. And if it's 5 or 6 year old stand and it's still doing well for you, you might want to clean it up that way. The switchgrass, it has no harm, no effect on the switchgrass whatsoever.
Okay, I think, Ron, did you want to add anything in there?
The only thing that we had a section of the field where you ran out of spray of the pursuit, and we had a lot of broadleaves in there, and time is the best cure for that. If the switchgrass gets going next year, it beats it out. I don't have any experience with clovers or anything like that, but the area of the field that last year was pretty weedy, this year was pretty good. So it was a little bit thinner than the rest of the field, but I'm 100% certain that year 3 it'll be solid switchgrass. So
Yeah.
Just one more thing on the back end of that question there, the notion of having that legume component in these fields. Again, I'm super excited about that. One thing that I've always thought is clover's a good candidate for that, easily managed, people are used to it, yada, yada, yada. Well, as it turns out, clover probably isn't our best choice for that, but there are others that can. I will say from her personal experience though, recently, seeing that in the field, clover did seem to pull down the yield in an area of the field on our fully established switchgrass field. It's been there for 9 years. Did start to outcompete that switchgrass, whether that's just a leg up across that area the clover had. I don't think it was anything for the fault of the switchgrass or for any specific management. It's just that's what I saw. So, we just need to be aware of that and know that in the long run, in some situations, that competition, albeit sometimes forming a synergy, can get out of hand and start to favor the broadleaf there in those fields. So just something to be aware of.
And Scott, Daniel is asking if that was red clover.
I think I had seen both in the field. Thinking back on it now, I wouldn't want to say which I was looking at specifically. We have both sort of occurrences in the field. I would assume it was outside clover, but I can't say that for certain.
Yeah.
And thank you for the input, he says.
Sir, so just be mindful of time that Roger is also here that's going to give a presentation, I think, on some of the new varieties. So maybe that's a time. And we will be having some questions afterwards after Roger's presentation. So what I am going to say is last words. So if a dairy producer is looking at getting into switchgrass and growing switchgrass for use on their dairy, like really brief, kind of like 1 or 2 sentences of what advice you would leave with them, and go. We'll start with Scott.
We're going to get caught up in thinking about the uses directly on the farm and things like that. And there's a lot of great stuff for that, but I encourage farmers to think about this from an efficiency standpoint. Looking at this as a way to trim the operation. If that's not just efficiency across all your acres, it can be efficiency just in the time of day you have in any given time by being able to make this conversion. You'll find that that'll play out in real time, but the efficiencies that you can find across lower production acres is, the data's out there to show that. So I encourage them to think outside the box and think about conservation uses for it too. Dual purpose, satisfying nutrient management concerns is a big advantage, I think, and can find a nice fit on a lot of dairy farms. So thinking away from the other uses.
I think that's, I sort of think the same thing, to take the marginal land first as an introduction to growing it, because nobody wants to take their prime land to grow switchgrass if they're not convinced. But if they can take the erodible land or the ditch bank land or that kind of stuff, then they have to try. They really need to try it and use the product for a little while, and then you just fall in love with the stuff after very quickly, because the size of the crop, the volume, the guarantee of 3 ton, a 5 ton is a bonus, but 3 ton is a guarantee of straw, where we can't get that with wheat in this part of the country ever. At least I can't, but maybe some guys in the better land, but I can't. We have way too much humidity and way too much fusarium and way too much other problems for wheat. So this crop is just waiting to grow on dairy farmers' iffier land.
And Don, you're left with the last word of our panel.
Well, I think again, it falls back to where do you live, and what's your climate, what's your environment. In my area, we have a lot of very large dairy farms, but they live on very productive land as well. And I agree with my fellow panelists here. There's always a piece of land somewhere on your farm that maybe isn't just as productive as the rest, and that would be a great place to start. And work with switchgrass and work it into your feeding program or your bedding program, and just learn what the benefits are. And then if you're bold enough, like myself, and you want to put it out there on that mainstream top productive land and see what it'll do, you might be surprised.